Tariq Matthews just wanted to get home. The night air was cool, the streets quiet, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement as he walked. He had stayed late at work, picking up an extra shift at the diner to help his mom with rent. It wasn't much, but every little bit helped. He kept his hood down, his hands visible, his pace steady. Things he had learned to do growing up black in a city that never gave him the benefit of the doubt. Then he saw the headlights. A police cruiser rolled up slowly behind him, its tires crunching against the asphalt. Tariq's stomach clenched. He didn't need to turn around to know they were watching him. The siren whooped once, a command. He stopped walking. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he turned to face the car. Two officers stepped out. One was an older white cop with a buzz cut, the kind that had probably been on the force for decades. The other was younger, maybe late 20s, but his expression was already hard. Tariq lifted his hands slightly. "Something wrong, officers?" The older cop smirked. "Got a report about a robbery in the area. You matched the description." Tariq felt the familiar wave of frustration and fear wash over him. "I just got off work," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I haven't done anything." The younger cop stepped closer. "Where are you headed?" "Home." "Got ID?" Tariq swallowed hard. "It's in my pocket. I'm gonna reach for it, okay?" The older cop's hand moved toward his gun, slowly. Tariq reached carefully, pulling out his wallet. His fingers shook as he handed it over. The older cop took it, flipping through his ID. He barely glanced at it before handing it back. "You live over on 5th Street?" "Yes, sir." The younger cop circled him like a predator. "What's in your backpack?" Tariq exhaled sharply. "Just my uniform and my work shoes." "Mind if we check?" Yes, he minded, but saying no wasn't an option. "Go ahead," he muttered. The younger cop yanked the bag from his shoulder and dumped its contents onto the sidewalk. A pair of grease-stained work shoes, a folded-up apron, a bottle of water. No weapon, no stolen goods, nothing. Tariq clenched his jaw as the officer kicked at his things with his boot. He could feel it coming. They had stopped him for something. They weren't going to let him walk away with nothing. The older cop sighed, shaking his head. "You sure you weren't in the wrong place tonight?" "I already told you." Then it happened. The younger cop grabbed his arm, hard. "Turn around." Tariq stiffened. "For what? I didn't—" The older cop pulled his gun. "I said turn around." Tariq barely had time to register what was happening before he was shoved forward, his chest hitting the hood of the police car. Panic clawed at his throat. "I didn't do anything." The younger cop grabbed his wrists, yanking them behind his back. "Stop resisting." "I'm not resisting," Tariq gasped. But it didn't matter, because the moment they decided he was guilty, the truth didn't exist anymore. The cold metal of the handcuffs snapped around his wrists, and just like that, Tariq Matthews went from a hard-working kid walking home to another name, another statistic, another black man brutalized by the badge. But what neither of those cops realized, what they hadn't noticed in their blind hunger for control, was the woman across the street. A woman with a cell phone. A woman who had been recording the whole thing. And in just a few hours, the world was going to see exactly what they had done. The holding cell smelled like sweat and despair. Tariq sat on the cold metal bench, his wrists aching from the too tight handcuffs that had only been removed minutes ago. His heart was still pounding, a mixture of fear and rage swirling in his chest. Outside the bars, officers moved through the precinct, like nothing was wrong, like they hadn't just tackled him in the street for existing. He had done everything right, kept his hands visible, stayed calm, answered every question. And still, here he was. He leaned his head back against the wall, breathing through the anger. "They're going to pin something on me. They always do." Then, a door slammed. Loud voices echoed through the station. The sound of footsteps, quick, purposeful, grew closer. Tariq sat up just as a familiar voice rang out. "Where is my son?" His mother. Denise Matthews was not a woman who scared easily, but tonight, she sounded like a storm ready to tear the whole damn city apart. An officer, one of the younger ones, tried to stop her. "Ma'am, you need to calm down." Denise shoved past him. Don't tell me to calm down. I saw the video. You dragged my son off the street for nothing. Tariq's stomach twisted. The video. The cops had no idea yet. Denise stormed toward the holding cells, and the second she saw Tariq behind the bars, something in her face cracked. Baby, are you okay? I'm fine, Ma, Tariq said, though they both knew that wasn't true. Denise turned, her eyes locking onto the officer behind the desk. You're letting him out. Now. The cop smirked. That's not how this works, ma'am. Denise narrowed her eyes. Oh, really? So, you don't know. The officer frowned. Know what? Denise pulled out her phone, tapping the screen before holding it up. The entire precinct went quiet, because there it was, clear as day, a video, already with millions of views, showing exactly what had happened. Tariq, standing still, answering questions. Tariq, complying. Tariq, not resisting. And then, the gun drawn, the force used, the lie that had been repeated 1,000 times before. Stop resisting. The officer at the desk shifted uncomfortably. Other cops in the room glanced at each other. They hadn't expected to be caught. Denise stepped forward, her voice like steel. Let him go. The officer hesitated, then picked up the phone. Tariq exhaled slowly. For once, the system wasn't going to bury him, because the world was already watching. Outside, the crowd had doubled. People chanted Tariq's name, their voices rising above the sirens and flashing lights. The video had turned a local injustice into a national outrage. When Tariq finally stepped out of the precinct, his mother gripping his hand, the people roared. A reporter shoved a mic toward him. Tariq, how do you feel right now? He looked into the camera, his face still bruised, his hands still trembling. I feel like I almost died over a broken taillight, he said. And if that woman hadn't been there with a phone, they'd be telling a whole different story right now. The reporters scribbled furiously. The crowd's anger swelled. Tariq turned his gaze to the sea of people, to the voices demanding justice. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of them. And he wasn't going to let the badge win. Not this time. The battle was far from over. Tariq may have walked out of the precinct that night, but he knew this wasn't the end. The cops hadn't apologized. They hadn't admitted wrongdoing. They had only let him go because they'd been caught. And that wasn't enough. The next morning, his name was everywhere. News anchors debated his case on television. Some called him an innocent man brutalized by the system. Others dug into his past, desperately searching for anything to justify what had happened. He had a minor charge as a juvenile. Was he truly resisting? The footage is unclear. These officers put their lives on the line every day, and now their careers are at risk over one incident. Tariq turned off the TV, disgusted. They're already twisting the story, he muttered. Denise sat beside him on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Let them try, she said, her voice sharp. They're losing. She was right. For every talking head making excuses, there were thousands of people pushing back. The video had ignited something big. Celebrities were tweeting his name. Lawyers were offering pro bono help. Civil rights groups were demanding the officers be fired and charged. But the cops weren't backing down either. The department released a statement. The officers acted within protocol given the suspect's suspicious behavior. While the video captures part of the incident, it does not show the full context. We ask for patience as the investigation continues. Tariq clenched his fists. Suspicious behavior? What part of walking home was suspicious? He turned to his mother. They're stalling. They think people will forget. Denise's lips pressed into a thin line. Then we make sure they don't. That night, the protests grew. What had started as a local demonstration had turned into a movement. Thousands flooded the streets, demanding accountability. Signs lifted into the air. Justice for Tariq. No more cover-ups. Fire the cops now. Tariq stood in the middle of it all, overwhelmed by the sheer power of the people around him. He had never seen anything like this. So many strangers fighting for him, for what was right. A reporter spotted him and rushed over. Tariq, what do you want to happen next? He met the camera head on. I want them fired. I want them charged, he said, voice steady. And I want this to be the last time a black man has to prove he didn't deserve to be brutalized." The crowd erupted in cheers, but in the distance, police sirens wailed, and Tariq knew the system wasn't going to go down without a fight. Meanwhile, inside a darkened office at the police station, two officers sat in tense silence. Officer Daniels, the older cop who had arrested Tariq, clenched his jaw as he watched the news coverage. His face was everywhere now, replayed in slow motion, dissected, criticized. "We're screwed," muttered Officer Reed, the younger cop. "They're coming for us." Daniels exhaled sharply. "We stick to the story." Reed swallowed. "But the video—" Daniels slammed his hand on the table. "I said, we stick to the story." Reed nodded, but his face was pale, because deep down, they both knew. This time, the truth was louder than the badge, and it wasn't going away. The protests weren't stopping. Every night, more people flooded the streets. What had started as a small outcry over Tariq's wrongful arrest had turned into a movement. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all the names that had been ignored, all the stories that had been buried, all the lives lost to the same system that had nearly erased him. The city felt like it was on the edge of something dangerous, and the police felt it too. They responded the only way they knew how, with force. Tariq stood in the middle of a sea of people, the air thick with tension. Protesters held up signs, their voices raw from chanting. His mother stood beside him, gripping his arm, her expression hard with determination. "Keep your hands visible," she whispered. Tariq didn't need the reminder. A line of riot police stood ahead, their shields up, their batons ready. The flashing red and blue lights painted the crowd in violent colors, and in the distance, the dull thump, thump, thump of a police helicopter echoed overhead. The crowd wasn't moving. The police weren't backing down. It was only a matter of time. A protester beside him, a young woman with braids and a megaphone, lifted her voice. "We demand justice. We demand accountability. We will not—" A sudden bang shattered the air, a flash grenade. Smoke exploded across the street. Screams erupted as the police surged forward, batons swinging, shields smashing into bodies. The peaceful protest dissolved into chaos in an instant. Tariq's body reacted before his mind did. He grabbed his mother's hand, yanking her backward as officers plowed through the crowd. People ran in every direction, some ducking behind cars, others shoving against police shields, their screams drowned out by sirens. "Tariq!" his mother gasped, stumbling. "Come on!" he shouted, pulling her toward a side street. But before they could make it, a rough hand grabbed Tariq's arm. He spun around just in time to see Officer Daniels. The same cop who had arrested him, the same cop who had slammed him against the hood of his car. The man's eyes gleamed with something cruel. "Should have taken the hint, kid." Then the baton swung. Pain exploded in Tariq's ribs. He collapsed to the pavement, his ears ringing, his vision blurring. His mother screamed, throwing herself over him, shielding his body with her own. "Get off him!" she cried. But the police weren't listening. They never did. Tariq gasped for breath, the taste of blood thick on his tongue. He could hear his mother pleading, could hear the boots stomping around them, could hear the sirens wailing. And then he heard something else. A voice. "Get the hell away from them!" The chaos shifted. Protesters surged back, pushing forward instead of retreating. Someone threw a plastic bottle, then another. A wave of bodies moved toward the police line, their rage boiling over. For the first time, the cops looked afraid. Daniels hesitated, and in that second, Tariq felt hands gripping his arms, pulling him up, dragging him back into the crowd, away from the police, away from the swinging batons. He barely registered what was happening. He was choking on smoke, his ribs screaming in pain, his mother sobbing beside him. But then, a single voice rang out, loud, powerful, unbreakable. "Say his name!" And the crowd answered. Tariq Matthews. Over and over they screamed his name, louder than the sirens, louder than the police commands. Tariq blinked through the pain, looking at the people surrounding him, fighting for him. Daniels and the other officers were retreating now, their power slipping. The world was watching. And for the first time in his life, Tariq felt something close to hope. They weren't stopping. Not this time. Inside the police station, the captain's hands clenched into fists as he watched the news coverage. Helicopter footage showed the police attacking unarmed protesters. Images of Tariq's bloody face were plastered across the screen. The headlines were brutal. Police escalate violence at protest over wrongful arrest. Officer involved in viral video seen attacking protester. Is this the beginning of the end for qualified immunity? The captain turned to Daniels, who stood stiffly beside him. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? Daniels gritted his teeth. That kid just put this entire department under a damn microscope. The captain exhaled sharply, rubbing his forehead. The mayor's demanding an investigation. The governor's talking about new policies. And guess who they're throwing under the bus first? Daniel's stomach dropped. You can't be serious. The captain met his gaze. They want a name, a scapegoat. Daniels took a step back. No, I did my job. The captain's voice was cold. Not anymore, you don't. Daniels felt the ground shift beneath him. He had seen this happen before, to rookies, to the guys who got caught. The system protected its own, but only as long as it could. And right now, he was expendable. The next morning, Tariq woke up to the news. Officer Daniels placed on unpaid leave pending investigation. A small victory, not enough, but it was a start. Tariq sat up in bed, his ribs aching, his mother beside him. Outside, he could still hear the crowds chanting. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about all of them, and the fight was far from over. The end.